So last week I got the bright idea that I was going to try and use a BMW front subframe, control arm, steering, a bunch of other goodies on the front end of the Mustang. Of course, to track down these parts, I posted on a local forum, was put in contact with a bunch of friendly people from BC Bimmers that were willing to help me out with information, offer up parts. Eventually, I was put in contact with a place in Duncan BC called Bimmer Parts. That meant catching a ferry with my buddy Steven early in the morning to the island. We've been enjoying some super chilly but really sunny weather here, so it made for a really scenic trip. We brought our cameras, snapped away, just made a day trip out of it.
All right. So as some of you might have guessed from the intro, I'm on Vancouver Island, dropping the stuff that's expensive on the ground. My buddy Steven and I, who is behind the camera right now, are at a place called Bimmer Parts in Duncan, BC. They kindly programmed my MS43 ECU that I got with my M54. They had a full wiring harness that hasn't been touched or cut. They had a 5-speed that we're going to use to hook up to the M54 to get it running and starting, to basically just run the motor standalone in the car. We got all the wiring for the injectors, for the coil packs, all the sensors on the motor. So we're going to throw that on top, see if everything lines up. I got a cross member with control arms that we're going to throw in the car, see what we can do about making mounts and fabricating, because I'm going to adapt a power steering rack, control arms, and the front cross member from a BMW onto the Mustang chassis. I'm gonna go grab a couple more parts. Steven and I are gonna hop back in the car and hit the road. And we'll probably see you back at the shop. Is a BMW M54 into a 68 Mustang package in the back of a Volkswagen. That's a car phone in a 7 Series. That's so badass. All right, it is the next day. We are back in Maple Ridge in the garage. Drug home this 5-speed gearbox out of a 330i. It was actually one of the owner of Bimmer Parts' personal 5-speed out of his car. Nick was also able to pull a full engine harness for an M54. He was able to program my Siemens MS43 ECU with a Euro tune in it. There was also some stuff to bypass the emissions, as this is a track car, we don't have to worry about that. It kills the immobilizer, turns off the secondary air pump, stuff like that. So basically we can run the engine standalone, just have to wire up ignition and stuff like that, and a couple signals and relays. So technically I would be able to make a stand and get this thing running outside of the car if I were so keen, but I'm gonna try and just get it mounted in the car. We're not going to do any of the mounting or anything like that right now. This was all sort of a precursor. I found these parts by posting on a local BMW page. Everybody was super helpful. There was a lot of people offering up parts for good prices and stuff like that. Everybody was super helpful with information, so thank you everybody on the Facebook page, BC Bimmers, for all your help. I appreciate it. And thank you to Nick and everybody at Bimmer Parts in Duncan for getting me set up with all this. I paid $1,400 for everything that you saw me haul in here: control arms, cross member, manual gearbox, ECU, and wiring harness. So we're gonna do a little bit of mock-up today, see if the cross member fits, see if the control arms are gonna line up where I want them to, and do some figuring out. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So the cross member fits pretty good lengthwise. Actually, the pins look like they're gonna line up center of the frame rails on the Mustang, which is really cool. I have to take the steering stuff off, the sway bar and the strut rods, get that all out of the way so we can do better mock-up later on. And what's really cool is we have an angled rear bushing mount on the BMW control arm. If we mount, you know, somewhere around there, you know, it'll sit under here, somewhere in there. The angled mount actually lines up with the ramp on the frame rail of the Mustang too. Next thing I'm gonna look at is I'm gonna stick that transmission on a jack and just kind of wheel it under, jack it up in place, and see how the bell housing looks in the tunnel here. The center of the input shaft and everything lines up too. Input shaft sits about where the crank would be. Albeit the transmission's rocked back a little bit right now. But that is gonna fit without too much trouble. And we still got room underneath for a shifter, which is cool. So I think this is gonna work. So I've just sort of got this mocked up and measured in. Roughly where it would sit. I'm just holding it up with clamps. So if I turn this up to where it would normally sit, that angle lines up almost perfectly. I could make inserts in there and probably have it bolt in. Now, the other thing is you want the pin ball joint centered with the strut tower. Pretty much dead nuts where we are. Have a little bit of caster to it. That cross member is about the same height, minus the bushings on the pins here, which I'll probably cut off. This control arm will actually sit a little bit higher than the old one, I think, because the lower pickup point for the old one is down there, and this is gonna sit flat, like a little bit higher up. So realistically, I can use that cross member, those control arms, I can put a BMW steering rack in this, hook it up to the M54, have all that function properly, and have a steering rack in a Mustang. It's gonna have a wider track width on the front, which is gonna be way better for handling, meaning I can space out the rear to match if I want to. We'll flare it out a little bit. This is gonna work. I'm so excited. All right, so it's the next day in the shop. I'm gonna spend a little bit of time today actually gonna cut out. I've decided I'm gonna commit to cutting out the stock control arm locations. I'm gonna flatten all that out underneath. This is kind of the jumping off point, the main building block, the foundation. So I wanna mock it up, confirm everything's cool, that I can start to think about fabricating stuff. And then we're gonna finish off the day with a little bit of welding, finishing up that A-pillar that I made last week. And then I'm gonna go upstairs and edit and be warm because it's absolutely freezing in here, just like the rest of North America right now.
I got the stock control arm mounts cut out. I take a couple clamps, just kind of stick them over here with this BMW E46 setup, and let's see how we're looking. Yeah, grab a jack. This thing isn't heavy or anything, it's just awkward to stick it in place with one person. I think I want to move it forward a little more. Somewhere around there. BMW crossmember is sort of chilling in there. Now let's see. Not great. It's pretty, it would sit pretty tall, which I don't want. So I have to cut the tops of these pins off somehow. Basically, we'd have to section this out and lift it up somehow. So just kind of rough judgments here. This sits about probably an inch lower than the stock Mustang crossmember. So what I think I'd have to do here is, I mean, it sits pretty centered. Like we got a nice center line on the frame rail. Sorry, the backlighting's really bad here. We got a nice center line on the frame rail for these mounts. Realistically, if I could get everything lined up, I could probably cut a notch out of the frame rail here and have just this flat piece. And then we could even weld this to the frame of the Mustang, and then we'll just gusset the end of the part where I cut, or plate it, and then weld it to the inside of the frame rail up here. We will have to do something with where the motor mounts sit, the bottom of the shock tower, but we don't need much. We only need a couple inches. So probably something like that would have to come out. And I can cut this part off in here and just plate over it. And then we can have that sit flush. I could even make it so that I could put a plate inside the frame with inserts so that this could be a bolt-on affair too. And do a little bit of fiddling, and then I'm gonna mock it all up with the control arms. And I'll show you guys what the sort of end result might look like. All right, so I cut these pins for the subframe mounts off, and that'll give us a better idea of how it will sit if I just had this nice and flat and flush. Well, that's pretty sweet. That crossmember and control arm setup, I think it's gonna work. Next thing I'm gonna try and track down is just a stock BMW strut or coilover or something, maybe a used one, used set from Marketplace. I don't wanna spend a bunch of money on the mock-up stuff. And I see how it adapts to here. And I'm gonna try and find a knuckle as well and see how that all looks with this all in place. Off camera, I'll probably clean everything up, get it a little bit more prepared to do this. We're not gonna touch the front end for a little bit. I want to concentrate back on the metal work, which is what we're going to jump over to now again. On the last episode, you saw me recreate this entire outer skin of the A-pillar and this intersection that meets the cowl and everything. And actually finish it last time. I'm going to take it over the bench, and I'm going to finish TIG welding all the seams that I have on the intersection piece. We're going to TIG weld it to the pillar, and we're just going to have it all together, ready to spot weld in so that we can start working on this entire corner, reconstructing next week. So. that is the outer skin of the A-pillar completely welded up. I do have to go back over it with the flapper disc and, you know, Scotch-Brite and everything, and just, I'm gonna clean all this up and metal finish it so it's smooth. It's not gonna get seen, so it doesn't really matter, but I would like it just to all be one level, and then I can double check that I got this on the right level and everything's kind of somewhat straight still. So that's where I'm gonna leave this episode. I hate to cut it short again, but I'm helping a friend put a power steering rack in this Saab, and I wanna get it finished up this weekend before I start editing. So next week, we are gonna start to reconstruct that entire corner of the car. We're gonna put in the A-pillar on the lower, measure everything out, get everything cleaned up, weld it in place, get the apron in, start on the cowl, get this thing in place. I'm stoked that metalwork is gonna kick off big time next week. But until then, guys, as always, be kind, drive hard, and at some point, I will see you on the road. Have a good one.